Good morning and welcome if you're a visitor. If you are unaware and come back for a little breakaway, we've been spending the last couple of weeks pondering Proverbs, and it has been something of a pondering. Really been looking at the way the book is an exhortation, certainly just the first 9 chapters. That's all we focused on. And we've sort of gone backwards and forwards a little bit, dipping in now and again to the chapters, but focusing back again in the first 7 verses. And that's what I'm going to do today. All right, what's happened? There we go. And in that process, we've been throwing a few questions out. How do you do life? Okay, anybody tried that with their friends yet? How do you do life? No, not yet. Not brave enough yet, are you? Maybe, I don't know. Or anybody had the courage to say, I do life better than you? How about that? That is the claim of the book. That is the claim of the book. I do life better than you if you're going to follow these instructions. And then, of course, that's irritating Lady Wendy, who encouraged us again and again for better living. Why have we focused on these questions? Because the result of reading Proverbs is actually a better life. That's actually what we're looking for. That's the product. And it asks us again as to why we read our Bibles in the first place. Why is it that we spend time looking at words, trying to understand them, and then seeing how they apply to our lives? It's because we're looking at life. Well, my sister Joyce is a pretty sharp character, and she can cut you in two with half a sentence. It's great because she won't suffer fools gladly. In that sense, I don't know what that phrase means, but it's often used for people who are short, curt, or in some circles just downright rude. They could be Germans, for all we know. Steady. Bit of cultural quotient coming through there. Did you notice that? But my sister Joyce actually keeps me, and I'm really glad for my family. They're not Christians. I love them to bits, but every now and again they just keep you on the ground, which is great. And there was one time my father-in-law was trying to be clever, bless him, and trying to make us all laugh. And she came downstairs, and in a sentence, she said this: "Get a life, Terry." And she just totally undercut this whole way of being in half a sentence. Now, that's probably a negative use of the way that we use language, but Proverbs, in the second half of the book, takes little phrases and distillations of life and can just cut you at the knees. It can get under your skin, and it can expose all the things that you don't actually want it to expose. It does that mostly positively. So in chapter 15, verse 23, a person finds joy in giving an apt reply. And how good is a timely word? Oh, I just needed that. Or, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in setting of silver. That phraseology, that set of words is extremely valuable to me. And I needed that in order to live. And as we've looked at Proverbs, just very briefly, the point is that these truths, these set of words, this way of describing things are fitting to help us live. That's the thing I've been going with. And it's comprehensive in our toolbox for living, our skill set for being real people in a real world in relation to God. And as we read through this text, as we're looking to understand it, as we try and put it into practice, as we respond to it and listen, it's comprehensive skill to live. But live how? To live wisely. That's what it's up to. And just as the Lord has a set of physical laws for the way things work, He has appointed moral laws to live as we were meant to. Break the physical law, and there are often detrimental results. Break the moral law, and similarly. So this is all exhortation, and it's a way of trying to say, look, actually, Joyce is going to come into your life, and you might be very happily going along as you think you're going along, and she's going to come along to you and she said, from Proverbs, I'm quite happy to say to you, get a life. And it's going to arrest you. It's going to make you think, have I really got a life? And this is a book which is trying to make that point again. Okay? That's where we've been going with this. And the exhortational drift in the first 9 chapters are, you can't learn to live the life of wisdom that God wants to give us unless you actually get it. And so chapter 2 verse 1, my son, if you accept my words and store my commands within you, the words that I'm saying to you, the instructions that I'm giving, the examples, unless you actually store them up and then applying your heart to understanding, unless you do that, unless you get it, it ain't going to happen. And more poignantly, as Frank pointed out, chapter 4, verse 5, get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget my words or swerve from them. Do not forsake wisdom. She'll protect you. Love her. She will watch over you. Wisdom is supreme. So you've got to get wisdom in order to live wisely. And it's on offer. But the fact is you have to get it. And the way you get it is by passively listening. But also, in some of these verses, it's about pursuing. It's very important to put this stuff, wear it as a garland, a crown on your head, a garland round your neck. Treat it as the apple of your eye. Make sure that your feet are travelling in the right direction and not into the red light district. It's as basic as that. And it's like the whole of your person is getting it. I remember there's a Don Carson one time said, what you need to do to get this book, it was Apostolic Preaching of the Cross by Leon Morris, said, sell your shirt. I thought that was a bit dramatic. Because this book was so valuable for the particular subject. If you're prepared to get it, then it means that you're going to have to get it. And you're going to try all means possible in order to do that. And so it's very important for us as Christian lives, I think that maybe I'll just sort of saunter through the Christian experience and maybe I'll absorb it by osmosis or maybe it'll come to me or somebody will just put it. No, you actually have to pursue that baby. Listening actively, for all you good counsellors out there, but also getting it. It'll come back to the introduction on that in a very, very direct way. So we've got to get this thing. We've got to get this thing called wisdom, which in summary form is skillful living wisely. That's basically skillful living wisely and morally. You've got to value it. Once you've got it, you've got to hold on to and think it's of worth. So 1:9, this will be a garland to grace your head, a chain to adore your neck. A wristband with WWJD on, which is far more important than that gold necklace and bracelet that you want to pay. How do you value wisdom? 3:13. Blessed is the man who finds wisdom, the man who gains understanding, for she is more profitable than silver, yields better returns than gold, more precious than rubies. Can you see that? You value it towards the end of this introduction, which we'll come back to. Those who spurn what God wants to give are fools indeed. Why? Because we're not valuing it. It's not the highest thing. And then Lady Wisdom in chapter 8 and 10, 11 reinforces that. Choose my instruction instead of silver. Knowledge rather than gold. What do we pay for? What do we value? What is the most important thing? Well, according to this book, it's not just getting wisdom, but then valuing it highly, more than any other stuff, material stuff, interestingly. And then Isaac touched on this before, so I'm not going to say much about it. But in order to get it, value it, is then actually begin to live it. It becomes a part of you. It enters into your heart. It's part of your thinking. And you begin to act out the life of the one who is the source of wisdom. Okay? So that's actually what the logic of Proverbs is. And it gives us some very interesting invitations from parent to child, or for older person to young person going astray, or how to get on with your neighbour when things don't go quite well, or how to make them better, or obviously the key thing which we'll finish with is how you relate to God. But in between we haven't really touched this Lady Wisdom, this personification of wisdom in chapter 8, because in chapter 1, beginning with that, at verse 20, she's calling out on the street. She's street preaching. It actually reaches people in their ordinary, everyday lives. This is not for those who are sort of yogi-type characters or Yoda-type characters who are divorced from real living. No, it's going to touch your life when you get up in the morning and put your trousers on. And whether you're going to upset your neighbour by calling on him too early. Proverbs about this. And Lady Wisdom is calling out into the street and saying, look, if only you would listen to me. She's a street preacher. But she's more than that. Because in chapter 8:1, she's calling out again. She's raising her voice this time. On the heights, at the dawn of creation, the way God constructed the fabric of the universe. I was there. I was part of that. Now, do you want to conform to the way God makes things and works things out so that life works for you? Listen to me. Listen to me. I'm preaching to you. I'm calling to you. And I was there when the very fabric of the universe was being brought into being. And I've constructed a house, chapter 9, verse 1. Would you like to come in? All these invitations. Come in and have a cup of tea. Would be a Western version of this, wouldn't it? Or, if you're in Sudan, it means you go into them and they give you a glass of water and hold your hand in a certain way. This is just a way of being hospitable. And it's God himself saying, look, really, with this embodiment, this personification of wisdom, she is calling to you. Come, eat my food, drink the wine I've mixed. And all of this material is doing what? The logic of Proverbs is exhorting. Why is this? It's repeating in all sorts of ways. It's contrasting because at the end of this section, you've actually got Lady Wisdom and you've also got Lady Folly, who's also inviting you into her house. And if you go into that house, then it's a very, very different end indeed. Her guests end up in the depths of the grave. So there's kind of contrast. What is Proverbs doing? What Proverbs is doing is for 9 chapters, in case you don't get it, if you can make your way through those 9 chapters, it's constantly saying, look, come on, listen, I am exhorting you in a very, very personal, repeated way. I'm actually preaching indirectly to you, but directly. This is not the way the law, thou shalt not, but it is a way of saying, I want to impose my way upon you, and I really, really want you to live. Now, will you listen? And the reason I've said this is for 9 chapters it does that in all sorts of ways. That's the point of it. That's the logic of it. Why? Because by the time you get to chapter 10 and verse 1 and that library of tens, hundreds of Proverbs, you've got to be convinced that you actually want to live this way. Do you really? Don't bother with chapter 10, verse 1. Don't carry reading on with the book until you're absolutely convinced that this is the way forward for you. That's the logic of it. And I'm exhorting you again and again with all sorts of images of life from the cosmos to the cradle. of ways in which I want you to live wisely. That's the book. That's what it's doing, all right? So it's worth mentioning that. So by the time you get to chapter 9 and you finish it, and you've seen all the various options before you, you then decided, well, yeah, I ought to get wisdom, and then I value wisdom, then I've got to live it out. You are then prepared to carry on with chapter 10, verse 1. But if you're not, don't bother. Don't bother reading on. Because as Jesus taught his parable about the pearl of great price, unless you're prepared to sell everything in order to get this baby, then you ain't going to find it. Okay? So that's the way the logic works. And let's go back then, because what I did last week was I said that in that early chapter, we'll finish that now just before Pete comes to us, is to say in the opening of Proverbs, it's great. It's one of those books that actually tells you why it's there. You know, you don't have to read all the way through it. And this is fantastic. It's the Proverbs, a collection of Solomon, son of David, and others, by the way. And it says, for this, for that, for that. It's a purpose. You read with a purpose. As you read this book and put it into action, these things are what it's for, there for. And I suggested that in verse 2, for the attaining of wisdom, discipline, for understanding words of insight, that the basic purpose there is to actually have knowledge, to think right. It's actually knowledge and discernment. That's where that understanding keeps coming up again and again, Frank. It's about discerning. It's all very well having knowledge, having deep knowledge of something, but how do you use it? How do you distinguish between crap knowledge or rubbish knowledge or stuff that's going to be harmful to you? And so it's about thinking straight. But then it's not just about thinking straight, because, as I suggested, verse 3 is about acquiring or getting a discipline. Are you a person who can be disciplined, adjusted, changed? Because then it says that that can happen to you. You then get to do what God does, which is being right and just and fair. And that phrase is used again in chapter 2, verse 9. You'll understand what is right and just and fair. And these are big words that are often associated with God himself. You begin to live the life the way God wanted you to live. And so that's acting right. Moving on real quick. It's about this person sitting down to you. It's personal, this is. Giving you advice so that they're giving you a shrewd way of living and a plan. Remember last week I left you with a challenge. Have you decided what the plan for your life is? Or God's plan for your life? What's the key thing? If you've got no targets, all likelihood you won't hit anything. But if you have got a target, like my goal in life is to be as much like God as possible. And I will do everything, I'll adjust all sorts of things so that that goal happens. That's the kind of planning that we're talking about. And so that thing in my life that takes up so much time, that has to go. That has to adjust because it's actually getting in the way. And other stuff, well, that's actually a distraction because my goal and my training regime is such that unless it hits that target, I ain't interested. Do you adjust and your life that detail? That's what actually Proverbs is asking us to do here. It's saying for giving prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to those who are naive and those who are slightly inexperienced, so that knowledge and discretion there in verse 4 is about a plan, actually. A plan for living. Now I know that Aaron gets up at 6 o'clock every morning and he's on that bike. Why? Because he has a goal of doing the whatever it is cycle that he's doing. And everything else has to get out of the way because that is priority. If you want wisdom and live the godly life, Proverbs is saying it's that kind of discipline that we're looking at. Please don't imagine that for 1 minute it's all going to magically appear and that after 45 years, 70 years, 65, 85 years of living, you've lived long, for sure. Well done. Have you lived wisely in that period of time? It is assumed that our older folk are wiser because they have learned the lessons. Is it always the case? Sorry to have a go, but I'm young enough, I think, to have a go. Or even our young ones. No, not old enough to have a go yet. But even some of our young ones, they're thinking, well, they've lived 3 or 4, 5, 6 years. Perhaps they've learnt more in that period of time about what it is to follow God. So it's not just having the birthdays and having 9 decades to live up to. It's have you lived in accordance with how God wants you to live. That's the key thing. Which is why when we get to another reason, verse 5, let the wise listen and add to their learning. Let the discerning get guidance. Now this is actually a word for you, think you know it all. I've got it sussed. Thank you very much. I don't need to be told anything. I'm already wise. Because it's a bit of a parenthesis which says, oh, and by the way, the wise who have learned stuff, why don't you actually get more wisdom? There's a tyrant in this church, and she makes you do stuff for a whole hour, 3 times a week. And you're running and jumping and lifting, and it's hurting, and you can't get away from this tyrant of a woman. Lady wisdom? I don't think so. Or is it? Because what I'm wanting to do is increase my levels of fitness. You know, my sort of corpulence is actually extending so much, and I want that to go down, and I want to be able to actually get up in the morning and feel with a bit of energy, and I've actually put myself under the regime of this person, crazy person, because I want to add to my fitness levels. I have not achieved. Or at least, maybe I have. Oh, it's good enough for me, I don't care. I'll just get fat and lazy for the rest of my life. And we do this morally and spiritually. That's the problem. That's what Proverbs is talking about. It does it in very concrete terms, but its underlying messages are spiritually, you like this. Are you a person who's easily led? Well, you get some wisdom, because it's going to be dangerous. Are you a person who is morally lax? Well, you better start reading this book and putting it into practice. Are you a person who's lacking in all sorts of things? Oh no, I've got everything I need. Well, this book says, add to your learning. And the second part where it says, let the discerning get guidance, it's actually a term from a sailing ship, where you actually guide the structure of the thing through the waters. Get guidance. All very well to put your sails up, but which direction are you going, it's saying. And then finally, so that these are all sorts of purposes and reasons. You don't want to stay as you are. You want to grow in your moral stature. And just like Peter said, he said, oh, it's great that Jesus has saved you. This is marvellous. His divine power has given us everything we need for life, and He's given everything we need through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. He's given great and very precious promises so that through them you might participate in the divine nature. Now, the early fathers spent books and books describing what that means. But then Peter goes on to say, for this very reason, make every effort to what? Add to your faith goodness, and to goodness knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and to self-control perseverance. Keep going and adding, don't stay. I don't believe there is a position of neutrality at all, either morally or physically, in all sorts of ways. You're either going backwards or forwards. Which is it? In the Christian experience, okay? You're either progressing, and most of us treat our Christian experience of a series of crises. Is, you know, oh yeah, I've accepted the Lord, great, now I'm going to heaven, couldn't care less about anything else. Who cares? So what I'll do is I'll just drift through life, it's okay for me. I'm going to go to heaven. And so what we happen is we just do what we want, and then we wait for the crisis, and then God comes back into the equation somehow. Do you live your Christian experience like that? I know what that experience is like. I have. The broad pace of Proverbs is step by step, adding, constantly moving, growing in your knowledge, understanding, prudence, vigilance, diligence, all sorts of words, synonymous words, which are saying grow in wisdom. And that's what this little verse is trying to tell us, is let the wise listen. Verb meaning to listen and obey, actually. That's the burden of that. It's not just, oh, I've heard you. Having a conversation with Marianne the other day, different Marianne, won't upset you. One of the colleagues, and we're talking about the last word in the conversation for between husband and wives. And the last word always has to be with the man. But that last word always has to be what? Yes, dear. And I said, well, yeah, I was anticipating that. Got you there, Marianne. And then she says, but do you listen? She wanted the last word, obviously. But it's a fair question. Do I actually listen? Do I actually listen? Do I actually read? Do I put into practice? The doing of it is the experiencing of it. It's not just the apprehending of it, the understanding of it. It's the doing of it when we'll truly live it out. Okay. And so finally, there are other purposes in this chapter, in the early parts. My father-in-law, bless him, says often, I've proved it out. And verse 6 says, this is another reason for the writing of this, for understanding proverbs and parables and sayings and riddles of the wise. There's a reason for this book. It's so that when you read the set of words, you'll have some sort of understanding and discernment as to realise why they are there. Well, to be honest, in the mystery of life, it is difficult, isn't it? There's a whole heap of conundrums and enigmas out there. And sometimes they're in these proverbs. But reading them, of having a key to understanding, which is going to come up in verse 7. But the reason we read this stuff is so that we actually might understand what the meaning is. This is more than the crystal maze. This is more than Mastermind or that terrible 1982 programme 321. You won't know, it's on Yorkshire television. And the whole of the nation, UK, would watch this quiz programme. All sorts of things they did. And during the programme, there were clues. If you got the clues, you got the prize. At the beginning of the programme, it says it's a quiz. It's a game. It's for fame and fortune. Ted Rogers is here to help you. What was interesting was, as the weeks went on, the whole of the nation watched this programme, and they never actually understood how the clues actually worked. It was almost as if there was a collective scratching of the head of the whole nation. Said, well, how does that fit that? It was worse than a cryptic crossword, and yet so they had to pull it from the TV at the end. Why? Because it was so cryptic, nobody understood it. And even when Ted Rogers decided to explain it at the end, no one understood it then. Proverbs is not like that. There are some enigmatic moments. There are saying, what is that about? I'm going to have to think about this. I'm going to have to live it out. But the reason for reading this book is so that you and I will understand. And then finally, the whole governing principle for gaining wisdom is the fear of the Lord is the beginning. Now that beginning can be translated first step or the principal thing of knowledge. And what does this mean? Does it mean that I quiver and shake and I'm debilitated by the whole idea of who God is? No. It means that I have a correct reverence and orientation for the person that I'm dealing with. That's the Lord. It's God. And this term, reverence or fear, is how it's translated, can mean dread or terror. It can mean to stand in awe. It can mean to revere or to respect. And in Exodus chapter 20, verse 20, when the Lord came down in a consuming type fire and made the whole mountain shake, Moses said that he's done that for a couple of reasons. He says, don't fear. The reason God has come down and given you these set of commandments is because that you might not sin. Question. Do you fear sinning more than God? Don't answer that, because I will be embarrassed. I actually prefer sinning on many occasions. And yet, the writer, Proverbs, says, look, if you really want to gain wisdom, underlying it all is having a right reverence for the person that you are dealing with. It's real personal, is this. And it's actually someone who cares for you incredibly deeply, but is such a being that in the presence of such a one, the right response sometimes is to be terrified. The right response. Because he's such an awesome God. And the problem is not when it comes to sin and God, it's my lack of understanding of who God is that's the problem. That leads me to sin. It's also my like of sinning that actually leads me to sin. And this fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, and fools despise wisdom is the thing that's going to lead us. And so that last part says, you are a fool if you undervalue wisdom. You are a fool if you turn away or despise what God is offering you. And that's the choice. So as we come to these Proverbs, in these first 9 chapters, I'll leave you with a couple of questions. Do you want to go on to chapter 10? Because we can't go on to chapter 10 until we have a real appreciation of wanting to be wise. Those little proverbs will be of very little use to us unless we really want them to. And finally, the fear of the Lord is the first step or the major principle in the whole process. And maybe in the next few weeks we might ask ourselves the question, what does it mean to really reverence God? What does it mean to really reverence God in my day-to-day life? In my relations with God, with other human beings, and actually with myself? Is the fear of the Lord, and not that sense of absolute reverence and right response to God, is that the governing principle? Or is it, I don't actually want to know God, so don't give me chapter 1, verse 2 for knowing wisdom. I don't want to know, actually. But at the end of it is, do I want to fear rightly? And then I begin to live a wise life. Real challenging, I think. Most underrated book. Hopefully next year we can get on to chapter 10. Peter.
Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows my sorrows. How could it have come to this? I've made it to the end of my life, and as I look back, I've made such a hash of it. When I was young, my parents said, don't assume you know it all. Run to God. Run from evil. Your body will glow with health. Your very bones will vibrate with life. Only vibration I get now is a cough. They said, honour God with everything you own. Give him the first and the best. Your barns will burst. Your wine vats will brim over. My vat's hardly brimming over, is it? Yes, Dad, I said. But really, I didn't want to listen carefully or even pay attention to what my father said. He said, listen carefully to my words. Don't forget all I've told you. Take to heart my commands, and they'll help you live a long, long time. A long life, filled and well. Don't lose sight of my words, my father said. Let them penetrate deep into your heart. He said, guard them. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be free. I wanted to have fun. I was strong. I was young. I didn't want to be told what to do. I wasn't about to get sucked in by anyone. Well, that's what I thought. He warned me. Stay away from the immoral woman. Stay away from her. Don't go near her house. But I was naive. I crossed the street to go near her house. I'd hovered around nervously, and then she just happened to come out just as I was going past. Oh, she was beautiful. She was seductively dressed, and she was sly of heart. And she threw her arms around me and she kissed me. And with a brazen look she said, "You're the one I was looking for. I came out to find you and here you were." Well, that made me feel more at ease. And she just smiled at me. And from the smooth tongue of a promiscuous woman she said, "Come, let's drink our fill of love till the morning. Let's enjoy each other's caresses, for my husband is not home. He's away on a long trip, and he's taken a wallet full of money with him, and he won't return until later this month." And so she seduced me with her pretty speech. It wasn't hard. She enticed me with her flattery, and I followed her at once, like an ox going to the slaughter. It was dark when I went into her home. No one was ever going to find out, I thought. But the Lord clearly knows what a man does. I was foolish. I thought the pleasure of the moment would be worth it. But the man who commits adultery is an utter fool. I destroyed myself. I was wounded. I was disgraced. My shame will never be erased. For the woman's jealous husband will be furious. And he was. And he will show no mercy when he takes revenge. And oh boy, he didn't. He will accept no compensation, nor be satisfied with a payoff of any size. And he wasn't. Oh, why didn't I listen to my teachers? Why didn't I pay attention to my instructors? In the end, I groan in anguish as disease consumes my body. How I hated discipline. If only I had not ignored all the warnings. Why, oh why didn't I listen to my teachers? Why didn't I pay attention to my instructors? I have come to the brink of utter ruin, and now I must face public disgrace. My life is ruined, and I haven't one blessed thing to show for my life. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows my sorrows. My sons, I want to warn you, don't make the same mistake that I did. Listen and do as I say. Proverbs says, and then you will have a long, good life. Proverbs says, take hold of my instructions. Don't let them go. Guard them, for they are the key to life. Don't do as I have done. Don't follow the path of evildoers. Don't even think about it. Don't go that way, Proverbs says. For evil people can't sleep, until they've done their evil deed for the day. Proverbs says, drink water from your own well. Share your love only with your wife. Why spill the water of your springs in the streets, having sex with just anyone? You should reserve it for yourselves. Never share it with strangers. Let your wife be a fountain of blessing for you. Rejoice in the wife of your youth. She is a loving deer, a graceful doe. Let her breast satisfy you always. May you always be captivated by her love. My sons, this is the key to living a pure life. May you always be captivated by your spouse's love. My son, it is my duty to warn you. I know the follow of following my own wisdom. Know this, the fear of the Lord is the foundation of wisdom. Knowledge of the Holy One results in good judgment. Wisdom will multiply your days and add years to your life. If you become wise, you will be the one to benefit. But if you scorn wisdom, you will be the one to suffer. Leave your simple ways behind and begin to live. Learn to use good judgment.